I did not crush my father's political empire because he ignored my labor on his expensive Persian rug. I ruined him for what he whispered to a billionaire donor the moment my water broke. Think this is about a rejected daughter begging for love? Hardly. This is how I used my baby's exact birthday to orchestrate the most perfect political assassination in New York history. Let me tell you how one taxi ride ended a dynasty. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for your continuous support. Unfortunately, our channel has recently been demonetized by YouTube, leaving us with no budget to continue operations here. Because of this, we are forced to pause uploading new videos on this platform in the near future and move our operations entirely to Patreon. If you find today's story captivating, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel to hear even more incredible, exclusive true stories on Patreon. You will find longer runtimes, deeper details that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube, and highly emotional, multi-voice narrations, bringing the characters to life. You can join us by scanning the QR code displayed on your screen right now, or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let me take you into the heart of today's story, told through the eyes of a woman named Octavia Gallagher. I am 33 years old, and at the time, I served as the Director of Strategy for Sterling Strategies, our highly influential family-run political consulting firm. The night everything shattered, I was in the middle of orchestrating the most critical event of the season. It was a massive gubernatorial fundraising gala for my father, Senator Arthur Sterling. We had taken over a sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate in the Hamptons, packing it with hundreds of the wealthiest elites on the East Coast. The air inside the grand ballroom was thick and suffocating, heavy with the scent of imported orchids, roasted truffles, and the intoxicating arrogance of old money. Waiters glided silently across the polished marble floors, carrying silver trays of vintage champagne. I had meticulously planned every single detail of this evening to craft a perfect, unblemished political image for my father. But biology does not care about political schedules. I was at exactly 37 weeks of pregnancy, and I truly believed I could power through this one final night of networking. I was entirely wrong. The first uterine contraction struck me with an intensity that practically knocked the breath out of my lungs. It was sudden, violent, and entirely primal. I stumbled right in the middle of the grand main hall, forced to grab onto the edge of a mahogany catering table just to keep my legs from giving out completely. The pain radiated through my lower back, a blinding agony that stood in sharp, grotesque contrast to the soft string quartet playing beautifully in the corner. Women in silk gowns were laughing elegantly, clinking their glasses, completely oblivious to the woman beside them who was actively being torn apart from the inside. Panting heavily, I dragged my agonizing body away from the crowd. I had to find my father. I needed help. I needed a secure car, and I needed to get to the hospital immediately. Every step toward the secluded VIP room felt like wading through a rushing river. I pushed the heavy oak doors open with trembling hands. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with cigar smoke and the low hum of masculine power. Arthur Sterling was standing at the center of the room, raising a crystal glass in a toast, with the most powerful and ruthless financial donors in the entire state. I barely managed to walk toward him, my face pale and contorted in sheer pain. The room fell into a dead silence as the heavy hitters turned to look at my trembling figure. Instead of rushing toward his heavily pregnant daughter, my father froze. I saw his eyes dart toward the donors, then toward the journalists waiting outside the hall. A flash of pure, venomous irritation crossed his face. I was ruining his flawless family picture. I was a stain on his perfect media narrative. "Dad," I gasped, clutching my stomach. "The baby is coming. I need a car." He stepped close to me. Keeping his back angled so the guests could not see his furious expression, he leaned in, and with a voice colder than absolute zero, he snapped, "Call a taxi or an ambulance yourself. I am busy with the family party. Do not bother everyone." The sheer cruelty of his words paralyzed me. From across the room, the wife of a prominent donor, took a hesitant step forward, her face etched with genuine alarm. "Arthur, she is clearly in terrible pain. We should help her," the woman urged nervously. My father did not even blink. He smoothly raised his hand, waving her off with a dismissive, patronizing smile, signaling that I was simply creating unnecessary drama. "Oh, please ignore it. You know how my daughter is. She always loves to overreact to every little thing," he chuckled, turning his back on me to resume his toast. That was the exact second my blind loyalty evaporated into thin air. A cold, absolute clarity washed over my mind, cutting right through the physical agony of labor. I was never his daughter. To Arthur Sterling, I was just a strategic asset, a tool to be utilized and discarded when my existence became an inconvenience. My hands were shaking violently, but my mind was terrifyingly calm. I slid my fingers over my Apple Watch and stealthily activated the voice recording feature. The tiny red indicator blinked, capturing his laughter and his dismissal. I did not beg. I did not shed a single tear for that man in front of those people. Gritting my teeth against another massive contraction, I turned around and walked out of that VIP room. I dragged myself out the front doors of the lavish mansion and straight into a torrential Hamptons downpour. The freezing rain soaked through my designer dress instantly as I stood alone on the dark driveway, clutching my stomach, waiting for the Uber I had just ordered, knowing full well that the empire I had built for him was about to burn to the ground. The Uber driver, a terrified man in his early 50s, pushed his sedan to the absolute limit, weaving through the slick, rain-washed streets of Long Island toward Mount Sinai Hospital. The rhythmic swoosh of the windshield wipers served as a steady metronome to my labor pains, which were now hitting me every 4 minutes. But while my physical body was actively tearing itself apart to bring a new life into this world, my conscious mind was locked inside an absolute, freezing vacuum. The agonizing physical pain I was enduring in the back seat of that car was absolutely nothing compared to the sharp, chilling psychological clarity that had finally taken over my brain. In elite, old money, American political dynasties, severe narcissism is rarely treated as a psychological disorder. Instead, it is actively cultivated, polished, and weaponized as a vital leadership skill. My father was the blazing sun of our universe, and the rest of his family members were simply planetary bodies expected to burn ourselves into ash just to keep him shining. Behind closed doors, I was the undisputed architect of his entire political empire. Every brilliant policy pivot, every catastrophic public relations crisis quietly averted, and every ruthless debate strategy came directly from the keyboard of my laptop. Yet, the glorious crown of the true heir was always securely fastened to the head of my older brother, Julian. Julian was a handsome, charismatic playboy whose primary political achievements consisted of covering up his expensive cocaine habits and charming the wealthy wives of influential state senators. I was the silent workhorse who carried the massive weight of the empire, while he was the golden child who reaped all the unearned glory. For over a decade, I accepted this deeply twisted ecosystem. When you are raised inside a violently narcissistic family structure, you are systematically conditioned to believe that surviving their emotional famine is the only acceptable form of love. That deeply ingrained, toxic loyalty is exactly the reason why, just 3 weeks ago, I almost threw away my entire future for them. I had been conducting a highly confidential routine audit of our third-quarter campaign finances late one evening when I stumbled across a gaping, impossible anomaly. The ledgers simply did not align. Digging deeper into the encrypted servers, I unraveled a shadow financial web that made the blood in my veins run completely cold. My father's gubernatorial campaign was being artificially inflated by tens of millions of dollars in illegal, undocumented dark money. This cash flow was not originating from local political action committees. It was being systematically funneled from a heavily sanctioned, foreign mining conglomerate through a complex, untraceable labyrinth of offshore shell companies. It was a blatant, catastrophic violation of federal election laws. My immediate, visceral instinct, entirely poisoned by a lifetime of traumatic codependency, was to protect the family name at all costs. I spent 3 grueling, sleepless nights mapping out a meticulous, highly illegal accounting strategy to quietly launder the dirty funds back out, patch the gaping holes in our records, and completely erase the digital footprints before the media or federal regulators could catch even a faint scent of the corruption. I was fully prepared to cross my own ethical boundaries and risk my professional license to save my father's throne, simply because I still harbored a pathetic, lingering belief that we were a unified family. Then, I discovered the actual tax declarations tied to those offshore shell accounts. As I pulled up the heavily encrypted digital documents on my private monitor, my eyes locked onto the bottom of the primary authorization pages. There, glaring back at me in high resolution, was my own electronic signature. Julian and Arthur had not just carelessly accepted illegal foreign money, they had systematically, deliberately forged my digital credentials on every single fraudulent transaction. The architecture of their betrayal was profoundly evil in its pure, calculating simplicity. They knew the Federal Election Commission was already growing highly suspicious of our inexplicably massive campaign spending. If federal agents ever kicked down the glass doors of our consulting firm with a search warrant, my father and brother were perfectly prepared to play the innocent victims of a rogue, overly ambitious employee. I, the director of strategy, was perfectly positioned on paper to be their sacrificial lamb. They had proactively engineered my federal prison sentence so the 2 elite men of the family could keep wearing their tailored luxury suits and flashing their winning smiles on national television. Sitting in the back of that damp, freezing taxi, clutching my violently contracting stomach, the final, pathetic illusion of my family completely shattered into dust. The cruel abandonment at the party earlier was not merely a moment of a busy politician ignoring a medical emergency. It was the ultimate, physical manifestation of exactly how they viewed my existence. The family facade was nothing but a gilded slaughterhouse, and I was just livestock. They thought they had trapped me perfectly, but they severely underestimated the monster they had trained. The moment the heavy sliding glass doors of the Mount Sinai Emergency Department parted, my physical body finally surrendered completely. The triage nurses took exactly one look at my terrifyingly swollen face, the unnatural, feverish flush of my skin, and my inability to stand, before forcefully dragging me onto a mobile gurney. The chaotic urgency of the emergency room exploded around me. Within a matter of seconds, a thick blood pressure cuff was strapped tightly to my left arm, inflating with a crushing, agonizing grip. I heard a young, panicked nurse shout out the numbers to the attending physician, her voice trembling slightly under the immense pressure of the room. 190 over 110. It was severe. Late-stage preeclampsia. My internal organs were effectively shutting down under the immense, unnatural strain, creating a catastrophic ticking time bomb that threatened to end the lives of both me and the baby I was carrying within the hour. The sterile, piercing white lights of the trauma bay flooded my fading vision, blinding me to everything except the masked faces of the medical staff. Needles pierced the bruised, clammy skin of both my arms as doctors rushed frantically to pump a heavy, burning magnesium sulfate drip directly into my veins. This was their desperate attempt to prevent my brain from suffering an imminent, fatal stroke. A cold plastic oxygen mask was clamped firmly over my nose and mouth, forcing cold air into my failing lungs. The stark, immaculate efficiency of modern medicine working desperately to save my life stood in a jarring, sickening contrast to the chaotic, decaying morality of the men I shared a bloodline with. I was hovering precariously on the razor-thin edge between life and death, entirely alone. Then, the privacy curtain was violently ripped back. It was Marcus, my husband, a brilliant and highly respected trauma surgeon stationed at a completely different medical center across the city, had instantly abandoned his grueling night shift the exact second he received the emergency medical alert. He was still wearing his blue surgical scrubs, his chest heaving violently as he gasped for air, having practically sprinted all the way from the hospital parking garage to the intensive care unit. Marcus did not care about political optics, perfectly curated press briefings, or protecting the delicate egos of arrogant billionaires. He threw his prestigious hospital badge onto a nearby plastic chair, sank heavily to his knees right beside my bed, and wrapped his warm, steady, calloused hands securely around my freezing fingers. The absolute, unconditional terror and profound love burning fiercely in his dark eyes served as the most devastating mirror I had ever looked into. This was what a real, decent man looked like. This was what true family actually meant. His protective presence made the cold, calculated abandonment by my own father just an hour earlier feel even more grotesque and unforgivable. Just as the heavy narcotic pain medication began to slightly take the edge off my blinding, skull-crushing headache, a harsh, metallic buzzing sound vibrated aggressively against the stainless steel medical tray next to my bed. My smartphone was lighting up repeatedly like a frantic distress beacon in the dim room. It was not a desperate message from my father asking if his only daughter and his unborn grandchild were going to survive this horrific night. It was an urgent, heavily encrypted text message from Arthur Sterling himself. I need you to authorize a wire transfer right now. $3 million from the discretionary fund to an offshore holding account. A reporter from a major publication just got a leak about the mining money. Pay him off immediately. Do not make me ask twice. I stared blankly at the glowing screen through the foggy plastic of my oxygen mask. My heart rate monitor began to shriek loudly in direct response to my suddenly spiking pulse. Before my exhausted brain could even fully process the sheer, monstrous audacity of his financial demand, the phone screen shifted abruptly from a text message thread to an incoming voice call. It was Julian. My hands shook violently, vibrating against the bedsheets, as I swiped the green icon to answer the call, pressing the freezing device against my ear. I foolishly expected a hurried question about my health, perhaps a tiny, residual sliver of basic human decency. Instead, my older brother's voice slithered directly through the speaker, dripping with a highly poisonous mixture of selfish panic and outright malice. "Listen to me very carefully, Octavia," Julian hissed into the receiver, his tone completely stripped of his usual charming, camera-ready facade. "Dad says you are ignoring his urgent texts. You need to log into the main server this exact second and enter your master security clearance code to approve that $3 million transaction immediately. If that investigative reporter publishes his story tomorrow morning, our campaign is over, and we are all completely dead in the water." I swallowed hard, the painfully dry air from the oxygen tube burning the back of my raw throat. "I am in the intensive care unit. Julian, I have severe preeclampsia. I could literally die tonight, and the baby along with me." He let out a sharp, wildly frustrated sigh, acting entirely unfazed by the grim reality of my near-death state. "Stop playing the dramatic victim, Octavia. You have your smartphone right there. You have the secure banking app installed. Approve the damn transfer, because if you do not do exactly what Dad says, I promise you, I will anonymously forward the entire digital tax file with your forged electronic signature straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation by exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. You will be giving birth to that kid in a federal prison ward. Do it right now." The line went entirely dead. I lowered the phone slowly, my chest rising and falling in ragged, shallow breaths. The brightly lit hospital room spun wildly out of control for a long, terrifying moment. They were actually going to do it. The men who shared my DNA were literally holding a loaded, metaphorical gun to the head of a dying woman lying helpless in a maternity ward. I turned my heavy head slowly to the side and looked deeply at Marcus. He was softly stroking my damp forehead, whispering gentle words of encouragement, completely oblivious to the radioactive, life-altering blackmail that had just transpired in my hands. Directly above his head, the digital fetal heart monitor displayed a remarkably strong, steady rhythm, 150 beats per minute. It was a perfect, innocent life fighting relentlessly to enter a profoundly corrupted, filthy world. I listened intently to that rhythmic, beautiful thumping, the precious sound of my daughter's beating heart, and a sudden, utterly unbreakable resolve crystallized permanently deep inside my soul. I absolutely refused to bring my innocent child into a sick family dynamic built entirely on extortion. psychological manipulation, and dirty, illegal money. She would never bear the toxic, suffocating weight of the Sterling family legacy. I did not cry. I did not panic or beg for mercy. The scared, fiercely loyal, and dangerously obedient daughter, who had spent the last decade quietly cleaning up their disastrous messes, died permanently, right there on that sterile hospital bed. With trembling but incredibly deliberate fingers, I opened the secure corporate portal on my smartphone. I completely bypassed the pending financial transaction approval page that Arthur was waiting for. Instead, I navigated swiftly to a hidden, heavily encrypted communication channel I had secretly built years ago to quietly coordinate with my elite, underground cybersecurity team. I tapped out a single, definitive, irreversible command code. Execute protocol, scorched earth. I firmly hit the send button, locked the dark screen of my phone, and finally closed my heavy eyes, letting the steady, clinical hum of the hospital room wash peacefully over me. The match had been definitively struck, and the raging fire was already spreading toward their empire. It took 14 grueling, terrifying hours of labor, 14 hours of blinding white agony, dipping fetal heart rates, and the heavy, suffocating haze of intravenous magnesium designed to keep my soaring blood pressure from triggering a fatal stroke. But just before the sun began to rise over the city, a sharp, piercing cry shattered the clinical silence of the intensive care maternity ward. I had survived. More importantly, she had survived. My daughter, Harper, was born, a perfectly healthy, screaming testament to human resilience. As the exhausted nurses gently wiped her down and wrapped her in a warm cotton blanket, an overwhelming, fierce wave of maternal protection flooded every single cell in my body. Marcus carefully placed our tiny daughter against my chest, his eyes shining with unshed tears of profound relief. We sat there in the quiet, dim light of the hospital room for a long, beautiful moment. Then, I looked up at my husband and asked him to retrieve the encrypted black work laptop from my emergency hospital bag. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his protective instincts warring with his deep understanding of who I was. But he silently unzipped the bag and handed the machine to me, with my left arm fiercely cradling my sleeping newborn and the plastic intravenous line still taped securely to the back of my right hand. I flipped open the titanium lid of the laptop. The glowing screen illuminated the dark room. The time for sorrow and betrayal had officially passed. It was time to play the most ruthless, bloodiest game of digital chess of my entire life. I connected to the secure hospital network and bypassed the standard entry portals for Sterling Strategies. Years ago, operating purely on a cold, underlying paranoia that my toxic family would one day turn their fangs on me, I had meticulously hard-coded an invisible, highly sophisticated backdoor right into the foundational architecture of the firm's central servers. It was a digital ghost, a supreme administrative override known only to my encrypted credentials. My fingers flew across the keyboard with lethal precision. Within exactly 60 seconds, I executed a series of cascading security lockouts. I permanently revoked every single access privilege, password, and security clearance held by Arthur and Julian. If they attempted to log into the system to check the campaign finances or delete evidence, they would be met with infinite loading screens and fake routine maintenance banners, completely blind to the absolute massacre I was currently orchestrating in the background. Next, I turned my attention to the massive, rotting core of their empire, the illegal campaign funds. I was not going to embezzle the cash. Taking a single cent of that dirty money would instantly make me a common criminal, effectively validating their desperate attempts to frame me as a rogue, greedy employee. I am a master strategist, not a petty thief. Utilizing my elite, high-level accounting software, I initiated a massive, automated batch reversal protocol. I systematically untangled the complex labyrinth of offshore shell companies they had used to hide the cash. Instead of moving the money into my own pockets, I triggered forced, unchangeable refunds, aggressively sending the tens of millions of dollars in illegal donations straight back across international borders to the heavily sanctioned foreign mining conglomerate. However, I did not execute these massive financial transfers quietly. A perfect crime requires silence, but a perfect trap requires an alarm. I deliberately bypassed our secure, heavily encrypted corporate financial tunnels. Instead, I routed the massive international wire transfers through standard, heavily monitored public banking nodes. I purposefully mislabeled the routing codes, intentionally generating a massive, glaring wave of digital noise across the global banking network. It was a brilliant, mathematical neon sign practically begging for federal attention. I knew with absolute certainty that this chaotic movement of tens of millions of dollars would instantly trip the automated fraud detection algorithms of the Internal Revenue Service. I was leaving a blazing trail of breadcrumbs that federal investigators could easily follow straight back to the Sterling campaign accounts, and there was absolutely nothing my father could do to stop the incoming audit. But the absolute most crucial piece of my counterattack was dismantling the physical trap they had laid for me. They genuinely believed they had perfectly forged my electronic signature on those fraudulent tax documents, effectively sealing my fate as their designated scapegoat. What my arrogant, technologically illiterate brother did not realize is that true. Enterprise-level network security never actually deletes the original forensic data. It simply hides it beneath layers of encrypted code. I dug deep into the foundational registry of our main server and resurrected the original, unaltered login logs from the system trash. I painstakingly extracted the exact network data packets from the specific night the illegal documents were electronically signed. The pristine, recovered code clearly and undeniably displayed the precise Internet Protocol address of the user who had maliciously applied my signature. The signal did not originate from my office desktop or my home network. The digital footprint traced directly back to the static, registered internet connection of Julian's luxury penthouse apartment in downtown Manhattan. The indisputable, mathematically proven digital forensic evidence was now securely downloaded, triple encrypted, and locked away on my local hard drive. I had entirely undone their malicious frame-up and successfully placed the federal noose right back around my brother's neck where it belonged. Finally, I opened a completely blank, highly secure email draft. This single document was going to be my ultimate masterpiece, the definitive, uneditable obituary of the Sterling political dynasty. I meticulously attached the restored server logs, proving Julian's deliberate identity fraud. I attached the complete, unredacted banking receipts detailing the illegal foreign money laundering operation. I uploaded the crystal-clear audio recording of Julian violently threatening to send me to federal prison while I was dying in a maternity ward. And as the final poetic nail in their collective coffin, I attached the pristine audio file captured by my smartwatch. My father callously telling his agonizingly pregnant daughter to take a taxi because she was ruining his fancy family party. I did not send this explosive, career-ending dossier to the local police department. The local authorities could be easily bribed, and inconvenient investigations could be quietly buried by my father's powerful, deeply entrenched political allies. I needed an executioner that could not be bought. I populated the blind carbon copy field with the direct personal email addresses of the senior investigative editors at the 50 largest and most ruthless newspaper outlets in the United States of America. Furthermore, I added the campaign managers and press secretaries of every single one of Arthur's political rivals across the state. I did not hit the send button immediately. Patience is the sharpest weapon in any revenge strategy. I set the secure server to hold the massive email on a strictly delayed timer. It was an automated digital deadman's switch, meticulously scheduled to deploy exactly 3 weeks from today, perfectly synchronized with the most critical, highly publicized moment of his entire political campaign. I closed the laptop and pushed it to the foot of the bed. The chaotic adrenaline slowly faded, replaced by a profound, unshakable peace. I looked down at Harper. She stirred slightly against my chest, her tiny, fragile fingers blindly reaching out to wrap tightly around the thin edge of my hospital gown. "They are never going to hurt you, my sweet girl," I whispered softly into the quiet, sterile room, resting my chin against the top of her warm head. I just burned their entire world to the ground. Exactly 3 weeks after the chaotic, terrifying night in the maternity ward, the Sterling gubernatorial campaign reached its absolute most critical pinnacle. It was the highly anticipated, statewide televised debate, a massive media event broadcast live across every major network. The stakes could not possibly be higher. The race was extremely tight, and this single night was designed to be my father's glorious, undisputed coronation. I was sitting comfortably on the plush sofa in my living room, thousands of miles away from the exhausting political circus, gently rocking Harper in my arms. The television screen mounted on my wall was muted, but I did not need volume to understand the sickening performance playing out in front of millions of viewers. Arthur Sterling was standing confidently behind a polished mahogany podium, bathed in the brilliant, unforgiving studio lights. He wore his signature tailored navy blue suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, radiating the manufactured, patrician authority that had fooled the public for decades. The debate had seamlessly shifted to the topic of moral integrity, and right on cue, Arthur launched into his carefully rehearsed, sickeningly hypocritical monologue about traditional family values. Even with the sound off, I could perfectly read his lips. He was speaking passionately about the sacred, unbreakable bond of blood, about how his dedication to his children and his brand new granddaughter was the true driving force behind his lifelong commitment to public service. It was a masterful, flawless performance, delivered with the practiced ease of a sociopath who truly believed he was invincible. I had absolutely no idea that he was standing on a digital landmine, and I was holding the detonator. I glanced down at the antique grandfather clock standing in the corner of my living room. The heavy brass pendulum swung steadily back and forth. The long hand clicked into place. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. Prime time. The exact moment of peak viewership. In the cold, silent depths of a highly secure server farm located on the other side of the country, the digital deadman switch I had programmed for my hospital bed was instantly activated. The massive, encrypted email containing the absolute destruction of the Sterling dynasty fired simultaneously into the private digital inboxes of the 50 most powerful investigative journalists in the United States of America, as well as the campaign managers of every single political rival on that stage. The explosion was not physical, but its devastating impact hit the television studio like a massive, invisible earthquake. I unmuted the television just in time to watch the absolute chaos unfold live on the air. Arthur was in the middle of a grand, sweeping gesture, his voice echoing powerfully through the auditorium as he preached about the fundamental importance of protecting the vulnerable members of our society. Suddenly, the lead moderator of the debate, a highly respected veteran political journalist, pressed two fingers firmly against her earpiece. Her professional, neutral expression instantly morphed into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. She looked down at the glowing screen of the tablet resting on her desk, her eyes frantically scanning the breaking news alert that her producers in the control room had just urgently forwarded to her. "Senator Sterling," the moderator interrupted, her voice entirely stripping away the polite decorum of the debate. "I must pause you right there. We are receiving a massive, unprecedented breaking news drop that directly contradicts the platform of family values you are currently standing on." Arthur froze mid-sentence, a flicker of genuine confusion, rapidly followed by a dark shadow of irritation, crossed his handsome face. "I am not sure what partisan distraction you are referring to, Susan, but the voters deserve to hear about my policies, not baseless internet rumors." "These are not rumors, Senator," the moderator fired back, her tone turning ice cold. The massive studio audience fell into a deathly, suffocating silence. Every major news desk in the country has just received a heavily documented dossier containing verified financial logs, federal tax documents, and deeply disturbing audio recordings originating directly from your own inner circle, specifically from your daughter, your former campaign strategy director. The color instantly drained from Arthur's face, leaving him looking like a fragile, terrified old man. The polished, aristocratic mask he had worn for his entire life began to crack and shatter into a million pieces on national television. The moderator did not give him a single second to recover. She looked directly into the main camera and then back at Arthur, reading the damning words straight from her screen. Senator, this dossier includes concrete evidence of tens of millions of dollars in illegal foreign campaign contributions being laundered through offshore accounts. But perhaps the most damning piece of evidence is an audio recording taken exactly 3 weeks ago, on the night your daughter was hospitalized with a life-threatening pregnancy complication. In this recording, while she is begging for medical assistance, you clearly tell her, and I quote, "Call a taxi or an ambulance yourself. I am busy with the family party. Do not bother everyone." A collective, audible gasp ripped through the live studio audience. The sheer, grotesque inhumanity of the statement, juxtaposed against the fake, folksy speech about family values he had delivered just seconds prior, was catastrophic. The camera zoomed in tightly on Arthur's face. He opened his mouth to speak, to deploy one of his famous, charming deflections, but absolutely no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed, entirely stripped of his power, fully exposed to millions of voters as the hollow, ruthless monster he truly was. Simultaneously, a very different kind of reckoning was taking place just 50 feet away in the backstage VIP green room. Julian had been lounging on a leather sofa, confidently sipping premium scotch and watching the broadcast on a private monitor, completely unaware that his luxurious, untouchable life was rapidly evaporating. The heavy wooden door of the green room did not just open, it was violently breached. Half a dozen federal agents wearing dark tactical jackets bearing the gold letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation swarmed into the small space. Julian dropped his crystal glass, the expensive liquor shattering against the floor. Before he could even formulate a coherent sentence of protest, 2 agents slammed him aggressively against the wall, forcefully yanking his arms behind his back. "Julian Sterling, you are under arrest for massive federal financial fraud, international money laundering, and aggravated identity theft," the lead agent barked, the cold steel of the handcuffs clicking loudly around my brother's wrists. "We have the original server logs and the exact internet protocol trace proving you maliciously forged federal tax documents from your private residence. You have the right to remain silent, which I highly suggest you use." Back out on the main debate stage, the situation had devolved into a complete, unmitigated disaster. The other political candidates were stepping away from Arthur as if he were highly radioactive. The moderators were speaking frantically over each other, completely abandoning the debate format to press him on the explosive federal crimes. In a final, utterly pathetic act of desperation, Arthur completely broke the strict rules of the broadcast. With shaking hands, he reached inside his tailored jacket, pulled out his smartphone, and desperately dialed my private number right there on live television. I thought he could command me one last time. He thought he could order his loyal, obedient daughter to release a statement claiming the emails were a hoax, a hack, a terrible misunderstanding. He desperately needed me to be the shield that would absorb this fatal blow. I sat in my living room, watching him hold the phone to his ear on the television screen. My own phone rested silently on the coffee table right in front of me. I had blocked his number weeks ago. On the television broadcast, the microphone pinned to his lapel picked up the faint, rhythmic sound emanating from his smartphone speaker. It was the harsh, repetitive, unforgiving tone of a busy signal. Arthur Sterling slowly lowered the phone, his hands trembling violently, his eyes staring blankly out into the blinding studio lights. He had absolutely nothing left. No family, no money, no power, and no future. In the span of a single, devastating night, the majestic political dynasty he had built on the broken backs of his children was entirely, completely, and permanently annihilated. 6 months passed since that explosive night, and the dust finally settled over the absolute ruins of my former life. The fallout was spectacular and merciless. Arthur Sterling was completely bankrupt. He was swiftly expelled from his political party and was actively facing decades in federal prison. The magnificent, multi-million-dollar estate in the Hamptons was seized by the banks. Every single billionaire donor who used to clink crystal glasses with him instantly deleted his phone number. He was reduced to a hollow, completely isolated old man, stripped of the only thing he ever truly loved, his power. But the most poetic justice of all came from his golden child. Facing severe federal charges, Julian did exactly what men like him always do when cornered. He folded immediately. My brother eagerly accepted a plea deal, testifying under oath that every single illegal financial directive came directly from our father, all just to shave a few years off his own prison sentence. The two men who once conspired to destroy my life were now viciously tearing each other to shreds in a federal courtroom. In the months that followed, Arthur desperately tried to reach out. He sent dozens of handwritten apology letters to my home, playing the role of a frail, remorseful grandfather. He even tried to manipulate the press, publicly weeping about how much he just wanted to meet his newborn granddaughter before he went behind bars. I did not give him a single word of response. Instead, I let my legal team deliver a permanent, ironclad restraining order that completely extinguished any remaining hope he had of ever approaching us. I finally understood that setting a boundary does not require an argument. It simply requires a locked door. Out of the ashes of that toxic empire, Marcus and I built something beautiful and entirely our own. We launched a new consulting firm called Harper and Hopes. We completely turned our backs on the elite, cutthroat political machines. Today, we strictly represent honest, grassroots politicians who genuinely want to improve their communities. We flatly refuse every single dime of dark money. It is honest work, and for the first time in my 33 years of life, I actually sleep peacefully at night. The true conclusion to this story did not happen in a courtroom or on a television screen. It happened exactly 1 year after that terrible storm, right in the middle of Central Park. We were celebrating Harper's first birthday. There were no imported orchids, no fake smiles, and no reporters. It was just a simple picnic on the green grass, surrounded by a small circle of genuine friends and real family members who loved us unconditionally. "She looks just like you when she smiles," Marcus whispered, wrapping his strong arm around my shoulders as we watched our little girl giggle on the blanket. I leaned into his warmth, watching Harper excitedly smash her tiny hands into her birthday cake. As I helped her blow out her single candle, a profound realization washed over me. The sweetest, most absolute revenge was not watching my abusers get dragged off to federal prison. True revenge was the absolute, surgical removal of their influence from my soul. It was breaking the generational curse of narcissistic abuse, living a brilliantly free life, and ensuring that my daughter would never, ever be used as a pawn by the people who shared her blood. She is free, and finally, so am I. Thank you so much to everyone who has stayed with me and listened to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please share your location in the comments below. As I mentioned at the beginning, our channel has unfortunately been demonetized, meaning we simply do not have the budget to keep operating here and will not be uploading any new videos on YouTube in the near future. We are moving our entire operation over to Patreon. If you found today's story compelling, please help us keep going by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon family. There, you can listen to our absolute best, longest, and most detailed exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on this platform. You can easily join by scanning the QR code right here on the screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you for your time, your empathy, and your incredible support.